Hello, my name's Kay McKenzie,
And I'm Luke Morgan.
and this is our proposal for the Chattahoochee River Trail, and our concept is an ancient river in a modern city. Carlo Scarpa, Italian architect, designer, and painter, had a vision about juxtaposition of the past against the backdrop of the present. He talks about reconciliation between the old and the new through materiality that develops relationships with the evolving urban fabric. This quote describes the type of relationship we are trying to create or emphasize along the river and the power of these types of relationships.
Through our concept, we hope to create a dialogue between the powerful history and impact of the ancient Chattahoochee with the modern fabric of the surrounding cities and development. We hope not to take over the landscape with modern implementations, but rather to emphasize the ancient aspects of the river through a modern lens.
These are some of the recurring issues we've chosen to focus on along the river that we feel are important to note in implementing the design suggestions.
There are not many formal access points on the NPS land to the actual water. The ones that do exist either are outdated and dangerous or are user-made by people creating their own access points.
The city parks nearby tend to draw more interest as they offer more amenities, updated facilities, and well-programmed spaces. The park is suffering from a lack of identity and use due partially to the way in which many of the materials used have degraded or faded, making them difficult to use to their full capacity and failing to enhance the beautiful surroundings. Now we're going to walk you through our analysis process.
We set up a framework for implementation, which we hope to narrow the characteristics and important experiences we want to highlight. The success of the framework is not in the development of one site, but the ability to create a cohesion of sites that tie the river trail together. The accomplishment of the design framework by using the tools provided will not only tie the sites together, but also inform the specific site's value and importance in the larger picture.
Design implementation should reflect, complement, juxtapose, or brand the visual qualities surrounding it. Construction and implementation must be grounded appropriately according to site, allowing for some variance from site to site. The implementation for the site reflects the desired programs for each site. Parking, transportation, and access will also be provided, as well as connecting sites or existing notable typologies along the river. By using existing tools as influence for choosing materials and vegetation, the design interjection will thrive long-term and blend seamlessly into the surroundings for a striking effect.
We decided upon 5 main effects that we are attempting to convey on each site, as well as in a linear fashion connecting the river together. These effects are what make the ancient river legible in a modern context and evoke different sense of place for the areas along the river. Reflection imitation, complementary, juxtaposition contrast, identity branding, access versus inaccessibility. These are our 6 tools that make up our experiential toolbox to achieve our desired effects mentioned in the previous slide. Materials and elements, shape and form, placement and views, sequence, seasonality and time, and vegetation.
Next, we looked at how effects have been achieved in other successful designs. This is a picture of the Trollstigen tourist route in Norway. A quote about this architecture describes it as being characterized by clear and precise transitions between planned zones and the natural landscape. They use water, rock, stone, concrete, and glass to complement the striking natural landscape. The use of industrial materials and construction techniques, as well as the shape of the construction, mimics in an attempt to exaggerate the already breathtaking landform. They create powerful points along a route with consistent elements at each one that create a linear identity. Access during certain seasons affects the power of the landscape. During the winter, the area is covered with up to 7 feet of snow, requiring extreme demands of the static force. The structures and details are designed to withstand extreme stress without compromising visual slenderness. The site is only accessible during the summer to visitors, and by creating a sequence of stops along the tourist route, the trail brings climax to the final stop, the overlook. By reflective material choice and placement, the landscape is reflected and extended into the design implementation. The waterfall design imitates in an abstract way the naturally occurring water features of the landscape. Poured concrete and weathering steel are the main materials used in construction. The steel oxidizes and creates its own patina over time, much like the physical weathering of the landscape.
The form of the intervention mimics the surrounding landscape. Softer vegetation sits on rigid cliffs and rocks. Organic forms sit within the soft vegetation and rigid forms sit on the rocks. Poured concrete and glass here mimic the color, texture, and temperature of the rocks, while oxidizing steel gives the user the experience of time and weathering. These design interventions literally provide a platform into a window of breathtaking landscape.
This overlook sits on the road going up the mountain. The form taken by the overlook mimics the cliffs down the valley. The waterfall incorporated into the overlook mimics the waterfall seen in the distance and is customary of the region. The materials used stand in stark contrast to the overwhelmingly natural and untouched surrounding landscape. The use of the water as a material here is particularly powerful.
This is the Highline Park in New York City. This park juxtaposes native plantings in a highly industrialized or modern city. It juxtaposes the extreme differences not just within the park, but also against the rigid cityscape outside the park.
The placement of the park above ground level displaces the user from the bustle of the streets below, but maintains the essence of the city surrounding it. It gives the users a unique perspective on the activity below. In a sense, it freezes time and suspends you in an ideal city situation.
By using the original form and structure of the railway track as a framework for the design, an identity for the park was created and informed many of the design choices, such as material. It also reflected an element of the history of the city. Given the linear nature of the railway tracks, the park became a linear park along different experiences can occur.
Now we'll talk about the stages of implementation for the framework that we have set up. By determining what forms on site can be enhanced or replaced, we address what is already existing and how it can match new implementation. After addressing those, determining which sites would be appropriate for larger scale implementations, and determining what the appropriate additions would be. Once multiple sites have been addressed, the consistency and identity will start to reveal itself.
The spatial typologies that we have set up indicate the necessary functions and implementations on each site. Each of these typologies dictates the way in which the necessary functions are implemented spatially. Social spatial typologies are geared toward groups of people interacting with one another and providing opportunities to do things together. Here we provide spaces for interaction and focus on human connections.
Historic typologies may have signage or technology that informs the users about the history of the site. However, the spatial techniques will help more to highlight certain historic aspects at that site, as well as reference other parts of the river to create a cohesive understanding of the river's past.
Recreational typologies are geared toward people doing things together, but with a focus on the activities of what they're doing.
These spatial typologies promote the feeling of isolation. They promote being separated from large groups in the bustle of the city and an immersion into the landscape. Path typologies characterize the different moments along a path meandering between destination points on a site. The quality of the path creates a feeling that changes depending on where you are throughout the site and alludes as to what is to come.
Recreational paths are relatively wide and smoothly paved. These are ideal for walking, biking, roller skating, or rolling coolers, kayaks, or strollers with your friends and family. Social paths are wide, relatively smooth, geared toward walking multiple abreast and experiencing the walk together. These are ideal for promoting social well-being. Isolation paths, narrow, can be smooth or difficult to navigate, ideally promotes isolation and removal from the city and an immersion into the landscape. These paths should be in close proximity to natural vegetation.
We chose to focus our master plan on Jones Bridge Park. We chose this site because we felt it offered an opportunity for each of our site types, being historic, recreational, social, and isolated, as well as enough space to facilitate gradual and meaningful transitions between those spaces. As you can see, we have implemented designs on already existing features along the linear site, as well as proposed new ones. The historic site provides an opportunity to interact somewhat with the existing bridge. The main space offers a beach and a boat ramp for users floating down the river to get off and explore. There is also a gathering space and areas to camp or set up a hammock. The floating steel shoals reflect a modern take on the rock shoals just downstream. They offer a space to get off and enjoy lunch under the bridge while staying on the water. Since we are deeming this site a historic site, these are the desired facilities and functions provided on site as per our spatial typologies. The Corten steel retaining wall and water wall imitates subtly the character of the rock faces along the Chattahoochee. This reflects a historic aspect of the river as the steel changes over time, much like the rocks change in weather over time. The social site creates an opportunity for people to gather and enjoy the river in a modern, well-equipped space. The space is somewhat divided into 3 smaller sections by raised Corten steel planters, giving the opportunity for multiple gatherings at once. The spaces converge at the water, however, creating a true community space for interaction amongst the users. The path type changes as one progresses from a path of isolation to a path of gathering. These are our social spatial typologies that we have applied on site. By using the materiality inspired by the main architectural element on the site, Jones Bridge, a modern take on what the river is used for now versus what it was used for then can be revealed. The ephemeral quality of water takes on a different form as it flows onto the steps, reflecting the newer nature of the site while maintaining its historic reflection as well.
These areas of isolation use dense, native vegetation to provide a sense of removal from the busy day-to-day life and an immersion into nature. While these sites may be a little more rustic in their nature, they should continue to use the material palette of other sites and a high-quality path material that will hold up better over time. Corten steel tables, chairs, or granite seating could be utilized in these clearings. Vegetation in these natural areas should be naturalistic in their character and native in their species. These isolated sites are striving to be as authentic as possible while maintaining the identity and quality of other sites with more intense design interventions. Isolation sites have paths that connect many smaller subsections of the site to promote the feeling of isolation. These paths should be narrow and surrounded on both sides by relatively dense vegetation. As users enter and move along these paths, they should have closed views, further immersing them into nature. As users near the next clearing, paths should begin to open up a little and provide a sense of intrigue and continue to pull users into the clearing. The recreational site at Jones Bridge has 3 small areas: a beach area to pull over a kayak and walk around, a pier area to walk out and take in the views over the river, and another green space to relax, lay out, and play. The pier has large steps on one side leading down into the water for controlled, relaxing physical access. The green space has controlled plantings and shade structures to encourage open space activities. The beach area is meant to allow waterbound visitors to have access to the site. While some recreational sites along the river should allow access to boat ramps, we decided the proximity to parking made this an undesirable place for a put-in or take-out point, but instead makes a great break along the river. As in the previously described isolation site, path here can be narrow and closed with views into pockets and clearings. These site types are meant to provide a sense of immersion into nature. Nature in these sites are critical to obstruct views and provide the enclosed feelings to make these sites work. These clearings can be experienced in sequence, either along a walk or while floating down the river. While floating, they can spark intrigue and promote stopping to explore. Views into the clearings can direct users through the site, while covered views out of clearings, especially along the river, can allow users to linger, watch, experience the site and surroundings.
Now we'll talk about the river typologies that we've identified consistently along the river. These typologies are bridges, shoals and fords, beaches, islands, cliffs, and unimpeded vegetation. We feel that these are important to analyze through the experience tools we have identified in order to achieve our concept. Now we'll talk about the materials on these typologies.
The Chattahoochee River Basin is underlain by Precambrian and Paleozoic crystalline rocks. The Piedmont region in which we are working in, of the Chattahoochee consists mostly of granite, schist, and gneiss. The geology on site of the Palisades is resemblant of these rock types. The element of water is also ever present in this typology.
We felt that bridges are a good example of form and materials that can inform future design. Weathered steel, concrete, and structural intricacy can create a palette that could be either ancient or modern. Though many of the bridges are structurally unsound, the influence from material and form and the ability to apply one of the frameworks to the site could highlight these bridges in different ways than just reuse. Now we'll look at the important form and views along these typologies. Cliffs and rock formation offer consistent views into the river formation over time. Forms and views of bridges are vertical and horizontal, which really help to break up the linear nature of the river. Leading views and curves in the river offer an element of curiosity and surprise as you float along the river. Now we'll talk about important vegetation along the corridor.
From what we know about the Piedmont region of the Chattahoochee and from what we saw on the trip, we can assume the dominant tree types along the river. This area was predominantly hardwood forest with trees such as elms, maples, oaks, and hickories, and pine trees.
After identifying the important aspects and limitations of each type of site, you'll be able to start implementing our suggestions all along the river and tying the sites together.
By rethinking the way native vegetation is used along the corridor, the desired effects of our framework could be achieved. Reflection. Vegetation mimics native plants and growing patterns. Complementary. Native plantings and rigid walkways complement each other when directly adjacent. Juxtaposition. Native plants and planter boxes juxtapose natural form. Material use brings juxtaposition. Corten steel planters, for example. Formal plantings on a more natural path provide an equal and opposite juxtaposition.
By rethinking and reusing types of materials already found along the river, we have provided a matrix that NPS can tap into to gain the consistency and provide a modern lens into the landscape and identity along the way. Again, these materials are wood, metals, stone, and glass and water. By implementing these strategies on most or all of the sites along the 48-mile corridor, cohesion and consistency in the ways the Chattahoochee is highlighted will start to identify the Chattahoochee as a river not only rooted in the past, but in the present and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.